Hello, romance book lovers. Welcome to Tales from the Heart. I'm Jenna Harte, and each week I post new episodes from my stories of crime and passion. Right now, we're listening to Deadly Valentine, book one of the Valentine Mysteries. This week is episode 12, chapters 28 and 29, where we find out what Daniel has on Jack that has Tess wondering if she is indeed sleeping with the enemy. Now, if you're eager to follow along or you want to get a bit ahead, you can download the entire ebook for free at jennahart.com. Never miss the mystery or romance by hitting the subscribe button. And remember, all the details and links that you might need are just a click away in the description. Now, snuggle up, get comfy, and enjoy the show.
Chapter 28. Tess hoped her face showed indifference despite the panic swirling in her gut.
We're currently looking for a man named Derek Martin. Do you know him?
Daniel asked. Tess knew she needed to tread carefully. She was a witness of sorts, but also the lawyer to a person of interest.
I'll take that as a yes.
Daniel said.
His car was parked outside of my parents' house the night of the fire.
You're sure it was his car?
Tess knew the police weren't beyond fudging the truth to get information.
3-digit match on the plate, plus matching description of the car.
But not the make, model, or color.
Dark 2-door hatchback. Derek Martin owns a black Honda Civic hatchback.
So do many people.
But as I said, his plate matches with the 3 characters the witness was able to identify.
There was someone up watching your parents' house in the middle of the night.
Mrs. Danner.
Mrs. Danner was the equivalent of Mrs. Kravitz from Bewitched, if Helen was to be believed.
Her dog needed to do his business.
Daniel finished.
It's still not much. You know as well as I do that eyewitness testimony is unreliable.
We found the car. It has broken computer parts in the back.
Okay, so it was getting worse.
Did they match the computer parts found at the scene?
We're waiting to hear back, but we also found a gas can.
Make it stop, was all Tess could think. She leaned on the edge of her desk and crossed her arms, hoping to give the appearance that the news wasn't affecting her.
I'm guessing you think gas was the accelerant. Has the fire marshal confirmed that?
Not yet. But Tess, you have to admit, no one has that kind of bad luck. He was there because Jack asked him to take care of it. And Jack was covered because he was with you.
Tess couldn't make herself believe it was true, yet a part of her knew that it was possible.
I've been trying to warn you.
Stop.
Tess held her hand up just in case her words didn't do the trick.
You're jumping ahead of yourself. If I do a search of how many other dark-colored 2-door cars will I find with the 3 numbers? How many students have similar cars with computers and computer parts?
Tess hated the pity that shone in his eyes.
You still don't have evidence, Daniel. Regardless of how the circumstances look, you need proof.
We've put people away on less, Tess, and you know it.
Well, you let me know when you have an arrest warrant and then we'll talk. Until then, I'd appreciate it if you left.
You're still going to help him?
It's my job, Daniel.
She moved back to her chair.
And I should remind you that it's your job, or should I say Detective Johnson's job, to prove he's guilty.
She sat down and began manipulating folders on her desk simply to look busy. He stood, staring at her for a moment. Then, with a shake of his head, he turned and left. When the door closed behind him, Tess propped her elbows on her desk and dropped her head into her hands. She thought back to 3 days earlier when she met Derek in Jack's office. Derek had left the office with a promise to take care of it. But take care of what? It couldn't possibly have been Tom. Jack was cocky, but not stupid. If he were going to order up murder, he wouldn't do it in front of her. Would he? She hated that she was even entertaining thoughts that Daniel could be right. Had Jack used her to create an alibi? Was his attention all part of a grand scheme that involved the murder of Asa and Tom? How could the man who was so caring towards her be the monster Daniel was suggesting? On the other hand, women's television was filled with real-life stories of seemingly perfect men who turned out to be serial killers.
Tess?
Regina poked her head through the door.
Yes, is Mr. Tate here?
No.
Regina entered the office, coming to stand in front of Tess's desk.
He canceled.
What is it with everyone lately?
Tess said.
Can't anyone keep an appointment anymore?
He asked for his final bill?
Regina spoke so softly Tess wasn't sure she heard her right.
What?
Regina shifted her feet.
Final bill. He asked for his final bill.
Tess was sure she was gaping.
How many does that make?
Regina handed her a paper. Tess looked over the paper and then up at Regina again.
Are you sure about this?
Regina nodded.
That's nearly all the retainer clients.
I know.
And a third of the current cases.
Regina nodded again.
What's going on? What did they say?
I think it had something to do with this.
Tess took the folded newspaper from Regina.
Here.
Regina pointed to an article next to a picture of Jack. Computer security and internet business mogul Jack Valentine. Top suspect in Asa Worthington's murder. Oh, great. Tess thought as she read the piece that pretended to be news, but was more like gossip. In it, she was identified as Jack's lawyer and lover. The story outlined their dinner and how his car was parked outside her home all night. Why anyone would care about that was beyond her, but clearly her clients did. Or maybe it was because Asa's family was part of the fabric of Jefferson Tavern, and those who opposed the family were tantamount to traitors. Were her clients leaving her for representing Jack?
Can you get Kate on the phone for me?
Tess asked Regina.
Try her cell phone in case she's not at the station.
Sure. Anything else?
That's it for now. Thank you.
Tess sat back in her chair, attempting to get a grip on the situation. But there was so much being thrown at her. She felt like a tennis player at the receiving end of a tennis ball machine without a racket, and unable to move fast enough to dodge the incoming balls. Her intercom beeped.
Kate didn't pick up?
Regina said.
I left a message to call you.
Thank you.
Tess said. Then, because she didn't quite know what to do next to salvage her business or her life, she gave Regina the rest of the day off. In her office alone, Tess tried to determine where her ordered life had veered off course. The answer, of course, was Jack. Why hadn't she listened to that little voice in her head that screamed stop every time he came near? Stupid hormones. Even more disturbing was the idea that maybe Daniel was right. Could Jack be using her? She remembered the saying about if something was too good to be true, it probably was. Jack definitely fit the profile of too good, too handsome, too rich, too perfect. But no, it just didn't fit with what she knew about him. Or maybe it was vanity that made her want his attraction to her to be real, or her heart needing his words to be sincere. Ultimately, it didn't matter. There was only one thing she could do. Tess opened the door to her home, longing for the sanctuary it provided. It may not have had the decor or doodads Daniel and Jack felt it needed, but it was her home, her place of refuge. And today she needed that more than anything. She'd barely had time to hang her coat when the comfort of her sanctuary was disrupted by a knock on the door. She knew who it was and considered pretending not to be home, but with her car in the drive, she knew Jack wouldn't buy her ruse. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door to face her fears.
Hey, gorgeous.
He smiled the winning smile, dimple and all. She managed a hello as she let him in. She'd just gotten the door closed when she found herself pressed against it. Jack's lips so thorough on hers, she almost forgot the horrible day she'd had. Almost, but not quite.
I was going to suggest dinner.
His teeth gave a gentle tug on her earlobe.
But maybe we could skip it and go straight to dessert.
Too good to be true. Too good to be true. She chanted in her head. It was enough to give her the strength to pull away.
Tempting. But we have some things to talk about.
All right.
He looked at her with curiosity. Because being near him always muddled her mind, she put distance between them by walking to the kitchen.
You want some wine?
She called over her shoulder.
Sure.
In the kitchen, she pulled a chilled bottle of white wine from the refrigerator, wishing it was something stronger. She now understood the senator's need for liquid courage as she poured herself half a glass and swallowed it in a single gulp.
Bad day at the office?
Axe stood in the doorway. He looked relaxed and a little amused. She knew that was about to change. Tess poured a glass for Jack and refilled her glass. She handed him his wine, then moved away, hoping he would stay put. Not wanting to delay the inevitable, she jumped right in.
I can't continue to represent you.
He studied her a moment.
Okay.
Don't you want to know why?
He shrugged.
I figure it's about separating business and pleasure. I know it's been bothering you to muddy the waters, so to speak. I'm just glad you chose pleasure.
With a waggle of his brows, he moved towards her. Tess wished she'd installed an island in her kitchen when the contractor had suggested it. It would have made a nice barrier from Jack's advances. Instead, she stepped back. This time, his quizzical expression showed concern.
What's wrong?
The police are looking for Derek Martin.
Derek, why?
A car matching Derek's was seen around Tom and Helen's house the night Tom...
You've got to be kidding me.
He interrupted.
They think Derek is involved. Dan really has some nerve.
The police, not Daniel.
You're going to defend him now after what he did?
The amused and relaxed look on Jack's face was completely gone, replaced with annoyance.
I'm not defending him. I'm telling you it's the police. They say they found Derek's car with computer pieces and a gas can.
Tess kept her tone level.
You told them this was crazy, didn't you?
What did you ask Derek to take care of in Jefferson Tavern the other day?
In a flash, his eyes were dark, his knuckles whitened around the wine glass. For a moment, Tess thought he might throw the glass, maybe even at her. Instead, he whirled away from her. He set his glass on the dining table and turned back to her.
You think I asked Derek to attack Tom?
He said with forced control.
I don't.
Which means you also think I killed Asa.
It doesn't matter what I think.
The hell it doesn't.
His words lashed out at her.
This is exactly why we shouldn't have gotten involved.
Jack moved so quickly Tess didn't have time to move out of his reach. He took her arms. His eyes pierced hers with anger and pain.
Damn it, tell me you don't think I killed Asa.
She wasn't afraid of him, even though she could feel the fury emanating from him. What made her jerk out of his grip was her slipping resolve. She'd completed 2 out of the 3 tasks she needed to complete to get her life back on track. But he was close. Touching her and her yearning for him threatened to undo everything. She pulled away, trying to regain control of her emotions. He let her go, but his cold eyes brutalized her.
Tell me.
She didn't respond. She hadn't planned to have him think that she thought he was guilty. In one way, it was an unexpected benefit, as it would make breaking things off with him easier. She didn't trust herself to follow through, but if he was angry enough, felt betrayed enough, he'd leave on his own.
Are you angry because you think I killed Asa or because you let yourself fall in love with me?
I'm not in love with you. And this is business, Jack, as it should have been from the beginning.
God, she couldn't believe she could say such things. The way he looked at her made her want to crawl under a rock.
So that's been your plan since I got here tonight? Not just to fire me as your client, but as your lover too. Or why don't you tell me what's really going on here, Tess?
She hated to see the pain in his eyes, to know that she was the cause of it. She understood now why men didn't like it when women cried. It was easier to deal with anger than hurt. Causing someone intense pain like she saw in Jack's eyes made her feel like the lowest form of life. He deserved better. She always knew he did, and she decided to remind him of it.
I didn't want this. I told you I didn't. But you pushed, and now it has to end. I was trying to avoid this.
That's bull.
He spat. He attempted to rein in his rage with a deep breath.
You're a coward. This is about you and your fear of being hurt. Well, congratulations, Tess, you win. I won't hurt you because you've beaten me to the punch.
He was right, of course.
I'm sorry.
Sorry? Sorry for what? Sorry you're a coward. Sorry you slept with a murder suspect. What is it, Tess?
I just can't do it again.
She blurted with frustration.
I won't do it again.
She was nearly on her knees begging him to forgive her. It was all she could do to remember that her future depended on following through with her plan.
I've already lost everything and had to start over because of a man. I'm not going to do it again.
What are you talking about?
He looked at her as if she was a little crazy. She wondered if maybe he was right.
I've lost my friends and most of my clients.
Because of me?
Yes.
Your friends and clients are idiots, and so are you for letting them dictate your life.
He was right. She wasn't even sure if she wanted to mend her friendship with Daniel and Helen, but she knew she didn't want to start her career over again. She'd take her idiot clients back if it meant returning to the quiet life she had before Jack re-entered it. He waited a beat as if he were hoping she'd take it all back. When she didn't say anything, he pointed his dark eyes and a finger at her.
You better keep Danny boy away from Derek. Now that I'm gone, I'm sure you two will go back to whatever it was you had.
He was finally going to leave, she thought. The misery of it was like a lead weight in her heart.
You'll regret this, Tess, I promise you.
She flinched at the deadly tone of his promise, and it served to anger him more. He spoke quietly, but there was no mistaking the contempt in his voice.
I won't hurt you, Tess. I won't have to. Someday, when you're looking back on your precious, cold, loveless life, you'll look to this day, this moment, and regret it.
She already did. Her heart screamed at her to take back her words, to tell him she believed him and to hell with her friends and clients. But her head told her how close she was to restoring the peace and balance in her life. The tug of war raged inside her, neither side able to overpower the other. So she stood watching him, waiting. With one last withering look, Jack stormed away. The slam of the door made her jump, expending the last of her strength. Her knees gave way. She sank to the floor and wept. Chapter 29.
Jack sat in his dark living room, mindlessly staring out the sliding glass doors that overlooked the Potomac River towards the Lincoln Center. The moon was high and bright, casting a bluish glow over the room. It might have been romantic in another situation. Tonight it was depressing. He took a drink from the bottle of Glenfiddich, feeling the burn of the potent liquid as it went down. But it failed to extinguish the pain or the fury. The pain he was used to. Having lost his dad when he was 12, and later watching his mother wither and die from cancer, he'd learned about pain and how to live with it. But the fury, this was different. Even with Cora's lie, there was anger and disappointment, but not this violent rage brewing, bubbling. A rational mind might think Cora's lie was equally bad, maybe even worse than Tess's cowardly rejection of him. But that's not how he felt. All he could see was Tess's cool demeanor as she told him he was worth less than fair-weathered friends and clients. He'd never done anything to hurt her, to betray her. Meanwhile, Daniel and his family cast her out, ignored her, and even accused her of covering up a murder. They'd rejected her, and her response was to break it off with him. What a fool he'd been to think he could win over her reluctance, to think that she would love him as he loved her.
You just gonna sit there in the dark?
Cora puttered into the room and sat on the chair adjacent to him. He responded by taking another drink.
Did she dump you?
I'm not in the mood, Cora.
I told you this would happen. I told you she'd break your heart.
You.
He pointed his scotch bottle at her. The amber liquid sloshed inside.
You broke my heart.
Cora flinched, settled back in her seat. He looked away, not wanting to add guilt to his already volatile emotions.
That was different. I was protecting you.
He was about to tell her that at least Tess hadn't lied to him, but caught himself. He didn't want to defend her.
Look what they did to Delia. My God, even Asa is dead. If Asa could be murdered in his own home full of people, imagine what could happen to you.
If the murderer wanted me dead, then why hasn't he tried to kill me?
It was a thought that had been rambling around his head for some time. Asa was dead. There had been an attempt on Tess's life, and then Tom and Helen were attacked and their home set on fire. But nothing had happened to him, or Cora. If the motivation behind the murder was Delia, then shouldn't he and Cora be in danger?
This whole thing may have nothing to do with me and your lies.
Stupid woman. I hate her for bringing all this.
Stop.
Cora's mouth snapped shut while her eyes widened. He wondered if she was afraid of him.
You did the lying. It's worse knowing you were never going to tell me.
I did it to protect you. Didn't you have a good life? I couldn't have picked better people to be your parents. Look at you. You're successful and rich. There are thousands of women who'd appreciate you.
Cora, I'm not interested in discussing this with you.
They sat in silence. He could feel her studying him, trying to figure out how to reach him. But he didn't want to be reached.
You must really be in love with her.
She finally said.
You think?
He mocked.
If that's the case, why are you here drowning yourself in liquor? Why aren't you convincing her to keep you?
He knew he could. Several times on the trip back to Washington, he'd turned around, headed back to change Tess's mind. He knew if he pressed a little, she'd give in. But for how long? When would the next crisis send her back to Daniel?
You don't even like her.
No. But I love you more than I hate her. And I'm worried about what I see now. It's just like when Lillian died. The drinking, the darkness around you. I don't want to see you fall like that again. Not when you've just got yourself together. I want you to be happy. It's all I've ever wanted. So get off your tuchus and go to her.
No.
Why not?
Because I'm not interested in having to convince her to be with me or battle for position whenever she gets nervous.
God, how that irked him. To be at the bottom of the list. Hell, he'd been cast off the list. He now understood why Tess had been so reluctant to let him into her life in the first place. Heartbreak was a bitch. He wouldn't wish this pain on anyone. Once he recovered, he wasn't sure he'd want to risk his heart again either.
Well, maybe she'll come around.
Doesn't matter.
He stood, wobbled, but pushed Cora away when she tried to help him.
It does matter. You should sober up, clean up. She could be on her way here now.
He got his feet under him and shook his head to rid it of thoughts of Tess. He'd wasted over 3 years pining for her. For what? No, he'd had enough.
If she shows up, tell her I'm not here. I'm done with Tess Madison.
Tess thought she'd known what it was like to have a broken heart. When she'd found Brad cheating on her, she'd been completely poleaxed. She'd never expected to be the type of woman a man would cheat on, or that she'd fall for a man who preferred other men, for that matter. Not that she was perfect or naive. Despite her upbringing that included a father with a longtime mistress, she'd come to believe in true love and that she'd had it with Brad. She'd discovered otherwise, and the pain and humiliation of it changed her. But that was nothing compared to the anguish that had her buried under a blanket on her couch. She would have never guessed that emotional pain could be accompanied with physical pain. It was as if her heart was in a vice, squeezing tighter and tighter until she couldn't breathe. The worst part was she was the one who had tightened the screws. At first, she'd reminded herself that she'd achieved her goal. She was now able to resume the quiet life she'd created for herself. After Jack left, she'd gotten herself off the floor and to the phone. She called her clients, eager to explain the situation and resume her practice. She'd only been able to reach two. One who told her she'd already been replaced, and another who unconvincingly said he'd think about rehiring her. The rest she left messages for, even though she was sure they'd all checked their caller ID and purposefully hadn't answered her call. Once the calls were made, there was nothing to distract her from the knife-like pain in her chest. Perhaps watching TV or reading a book would help, but it didn't. Apparently, Friday night TV was dedicated to romantic shows for all the loveless people who didn't have a date. It didn't help that all the shows had a Valentine's Day theme. She didn't fare any better with her books, which were all mysteries, but included a romantic subplot. Short of dying of heartbreak, all she could manage was to hide under a blanket on her couch. She knew she'd gotten up once or twice to eat a bowl of cereal. It was one of those brands with a complete day's worth of vitamins packed into a single serving. She'd managed to choke down a half day's worth of fortified goodness before her throat had closed up from the pain that she feared she'd live with for the remaining days of her life. The rest of the time she was on the couch, under her blanket, letting time go by. How long she'd been there, she didn't know. When her pity party was interrupted by a phone call, she considered not answering it. That would take more energy than she had. But then she thought it could be a client ready to hire her back. Wasn't that what enduring this pain was all about? She rolled off the couch and found the phone on her dining room table next to her client list. She noted that it was dark outside, but she wasn't sure if it was early morning or evening. She checked her watch. Just after 6, but was it AM or PM?
Hello?
Tess?
It sounded like Daniel. She didn't want to talk to him, but before she could hang up, he said,
The Martin kid lawyered up. He's asking for you.
Tess rubbed her eyes as she tried to think who Daniel was talking about.
Want me to call the public defender's office?
He asked, Martin? Martin. Then it came to her. Derek. And she remembered Jack's parting words. Keep Danny boy away from Derek.
No. Give me 45 minutes. Leave him alone until I get there.
Jesus, Tess. What kind of place do you think we're running?
Tess didn't want to get into it, so she hung up. She moved as quickly as she could, considering the gaping hole in her chest that threatened to bring her to her knees with every breath. She showered and dressed, still uncertain as to what day it was, or whether it was early morning or evening. She turned the radio on in her car as she drove to the police station, hoping they'd give the time. It was Sunday evening. She'd wallowed nearly 2 days.
Where'd you find him?
Tess asked as she walked through the station with Daniel.
On campus. He says he was out of town with a friend.
Is this your case?
She wasn't going to argue with him about a conflict of interest for investigating his father's attack, but she wanted to know so she could use it if she needed to. Daniel stiffened.
No, but I want to watch. It is my father after all.
I want to talk to him alone. You'll have to watch later.
He's in here.
Daniel put his hand on the doorknob to one of 2 interrogation rooms.
Are you all right, Tess? You don't look well.
Like you care.
Can you leave us?
He shrugged and opened the door.
Miss Madison, thank God you're here.
Derek jumped up as if he were going to run up and hug her. Catching himself, he extended his hand. Tess took his hand.
Did you tell them anything?
His expression grew worried.
Yes, I answered some questions, but I don't know.
He looked like he was on the verge of crying. It struck her that he was so young, too young to be caught up in this mess.
They started asking me questions like I killed someone or something.
They're investigating an attack.
What attack? I didn't hurt anybody.
Tess sat next to him, hoping her closeness and ability to make eye contact would help him calm down and focus.
Derek, I'm going to ask you some questions based on what I know. I need you to answer truthfully. Can you do that?
He stared at her for a moment.
What if I say something that accidentally gets me in trouble? I've seen it on TV where someone tells the truth and they still get in trouble.
I'm your lawyer. What you tell me is just between you and me.
Really?
She nodded.
Where were you Wednesday night at about 2 a.m.?
They asked me that. I told them I was in my dorm room.
Was anyone with you?
No,
Don't you have a roommate?
Tess asked.
he was with his girlfriend. He sleeps at her place a lot.
How about pizza? Did you order any? Take a break with friends?
He shook his head.
I had a big test in my lit class. I needed to do well.
Tess paused as she pulled a pad of paper out of her purse. She hadn't wanted to start with the notes right away because she was afraid it would make Derek more nervous than he already was.
The police deputy says your car was parked on Colonial Avenue that night.
No, my car was at the university.
Are you sure about that?
Tess watched his face for any sign that he might be lying.
Yes.
Did you let someone borrow it?
No.
His brows pulled together.
Colonial Avenue.
That's right.
I was there Tuesday night, not Wednesday.
His eyes widened in panic.
Is that bad?
Where on Colonial?
At this lady's house, Miss Draper. Mr. Valentine asked me to set her up.
Set her up?
Yeah. She's going to be working for him from home, and she needed her computer and internet set up. He asked me to do it.
What night was that?
Tess asked, testing his memory and his story. She knew Daniel would do it, so she might as well get him ready.
Tuesday. I drove down from Washington that night. The day I saw you in Mr. Valentine's office, remember?
Tess nodded. She felt a mixture of relief and guilt at knowing what Jack had asked Derek to take care of. Why hadn't he explained that to her when she asked?
Are you sure it was Tuesday?
Positive, you can ask her.
You can be sure of it,
This is good, Derek.
she said, wanting to reassure him.
If she can verify the date, that will help you.
It still didn't clear him for Wednesday night, but Tess thought it was a plausible enough story to be true.
The police found your car in a vacant lot off Spouse Street.
I left it there when Joe and I drove to Myrtle Beach this weekend. We went in his car.
Why not leave it on campus?
Tess asked.
Joe didn't want to come all the way into town.
Is Joe a student?
Not here at JT.
The police found parts of computers in your trunk.
Can they do that? Just go through my car like that?
He looked her incredulously.
Sometimes they can. Where are the parts from?
I do computer work. To save money, sometimes I salvage parts.
The police were making a big leap to think used computer parts were part of a broken computer from Tom's house, unless Derek had broken pieces in his car.
Are any of these parts broken off from laptops?
Sometimes casings and stuff get broken. Mostly I just try to save the hardware.
You also had a gas can.
I have lots of stuff in my car. I don't understand why it's anyone's business.
She noted his annoyance and hoped that he could hold it together long enough to talk to the police.
These are the questions the police are going to ask. Consider them practice. By knowing the answer, I can make sure you don't say anything that will get you in more trouble.
He shrugged.
Okay.
There was a fire and a broken computer at the scene of the attack I told you about.
On Colonial?
Right.
She could see now that he understood how the police would be suspicious of him.
It's all just a coincidence.
Panic rising in his voice, Tess reached out to pat his hand.
I think it's going to be okay. Can you tell me about the gas can?
My gas gauge is broken and I forget to check the mileage when I gas up, so I run out of gas a lot.
Tess couldn't help but feel sorry for the boy. In the end, he was another one of Daniel and Jack's casualties.
Have you called Mr. Valentine?
No,
He shook his head.
I don't want to bother him.
When we're done here, you should call him.
Do I need bail?
No.
Tess said with a laugh.
I just think he should know. He'll be able to confirm that he sent you to set up the computer on Colonial.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to tell the detectives that they can come question you now. You tell them what you told me. If I stop you, don't say anything, okay?
He nodded. As she predicted, Detective Johnson asked the same questions she had with only a few minor variations. When he tried to intimidate Derek, Tess intervened. With or without her there, Tess knew that Derek's story would be checked out, and he'd most likely be cleared. She knew that Detective Johnson, and hopefully Daniel, knew it too. She began to wonder if Daniel's purpose in telling her about Derek the other day was simply to get her to second-guess Jack.
This was pretty weak,
she said to Daniel once she sent Derek home.
A lot of investigative work is following leads that turn out to be nothing. If he'd answered our questions, we would have checked out his story, and he'd be in his dorm already. It was his idea to call you.
So, you agree that Derek is just a poor student who unfortunately works for Jack?
Tess said.
It was solid work, Tess.
He defended himself.
I'm tired of you thinking otherwise.
I'm pretty tired of it all myself.
Not wanting to have the same argument yet again, she turned to leave.
Before you go,
He said, catching up to her.
do you know anything about a Cora Peterson?
Tess nearly asked him if he was going through Jack's Rolodex to find an accomplice. but then she wondered if maybe Daniel was making the connection between Cora and Delia.
I've met her.
And
And what?
She hoped he didn't ask if he thought she was capable of murder because her run-in with Cora confirmed she probably was.
how well do you know her?
Not well. To be honest, I don't think she likes me.
Why not?
I don't really want to go into it.
While she did want him looking into what Asa was doing that night, she felt certain the whole Cora Delia Jack Senator thing would be used against Jack somehow. Fortunately, even if she wanted to tell, she couldn't.
That dead secretary of the senator's was her daughter.
Tess kept her face expressionless.
It's curious that Jack would be friends with a woman whose daughter worked for the senator.
Why? People know and meet all sorts of people.
Tess said.
True, but in this case,
She could tell Daniel was trying to get her to fill in some gaps, but she kept quiet.
what's really weird is Asa's connection to it all.
He continued when she didn't take the bait.
Really?
He gave her an irritated look.
Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about, Tess. You're the one who said we needed to look at the information Asa had.
True. But it's not your case. I can't talk about it to the police, and I certainly can't talk about it to you.
We have only Jack's word about this information. And this weird series of connections. If anything, it makes us want to look deeper at him, not less.
You can look as deep as you want, Daniel, as long as you focus on finding truth.
His eyes flashed with heat.
We need to talk to Jack and Cora.
By we, you mean Detective Johnson, right?
Yes,
He said, not hiding his exasperation.
it's my family, Tess. I can't help but want to stay in the loop. But I'm not investigating. I wouldn't want his defense lawyer to use conflict of interest or suggest the case is tainted at trial.
Tess ignored his sarcastic tone. She took out one of her business cards and turning it over, she wrote down a phone number.
You'll have to have Johnson call this man to arrange it.
Daniel took the card.
Who's this?
He's Jack's lawyer. Business lawyer until he hires a defense lawyer. If you want to set something up, communicate with Brad.
He tried to hide the look of victory at her, revealing she wasn't working for Jack anymore, but didn't do a very good job.
I see.
I don't think you do. I've got to go.
Daniel couldn't see or wouldn't care that her heart was broken.
Wait,
Daniel put his hand on her arm. Tess jerked it away.
I have some news about my dad.
Tess wanted to know how Tom was doing, but the anger and pain wouldn't let her listen to Daniel.
I hope he's well.
She moved away from him.
Hey, don't you care?
Tess rounded on him.
I do care. But right now, I'm not feeling very friendly towards my fair weather friends.
What?
Now that I'm not Jack's lawyer, you want to tell me how your dad is doing. I've been worried sick, afraid for him. But no one would tell me how he was. And now, all of a sudden, because I don't represent Jack, I'm worthy of the information?
Tess could feel more words bubbling up, but she didn't want to stay and make a scene in front of Daniel's police buddies. She turned and hurried away before he could come after her again. When Tess arrived home, her neighbor Allison was at the door with her 5-year-old son, Quinn. Tess mustered a cheerful smile.
Hi.
We're sorry to bother you right when you get home, but Quinn was hoping you could help him.
If I can.
Tess said, looking down at the boy. She invited them in, thankful for the distraction.
He needs a pet.
Allison said as they entered Tess's home.
A pet.
Tess wasn't sure how she could help Quinn with that.
My life is hectic enough. I don't need a pet to add to the mix.
Allison said. Tess knew she worked full-time and moonlighted on the side to support herself and her young son, ever since her husband ran off with someone he'd met on the internet.
Quinn has a pet show and tell at school tomorrow. I told him to find a bug or bring a stuffed animal, which he says isn't a real pet. We hoped he could bring Buster. He promises to real good care of him, don't you?
Quinn nodded, his eyes looking up at Tess with hope. As neighborly requests went, this was a weird one, but she had no problem lending out Buster.
Sure. He'll probably enjoy the change of scenery.
Quinn rushed off to the kitchen to get Buster in his bowl. Once Quinn left the room, Allison made herself comfortable on Tess's couch. Deciding having company was better than being alone with her grief, Tess joined her.
So, Tess, I happen to notice that someone other than your cop friend has been hanging around recently. In fact, the neighborhood is buzzing about his car having been in your drive all night the other night.
Tess blushed even with the pain.
It's nothing.
Allison's eyes widened.
Good for you, girl. Sometimes I wish I could do that.
Do what?
Have a one-night fling. But with Quinn?
It wasn't a one-night fling.
What was it, though? A 2-night fling?
He's an old friend.
Oh,
Tess thought she saw pity in Allison's face.
well, I guess there's always your cop friend. He seems nice.
He is nice, but I'm not in the market for a man.
I used to think like that. Then I decided that I couldn't let Clay's stupidity hold me back. It was his problem, not mine. I may be a little haggard, but I'm smart, resourceful, and my boobs are still north of my belly button.
Tess laughed.
I'm sure there are many men who'd be interested in you.
How about that man that was here the other day? Tess, he was gorgeous. Does he like kids?
Tess squirmed in her seat. She had no claim to Jack anymore, but she wasn't interested in his being with another woman either.
I think so. But he spends most of the time in Northern Virginia.
Her expression faltered.
I suppose he has lots of choices up there. Oh well, isn't that how it is? Quinn, we should be going.
Tess helped Quinn gather Buster's bowl and food, and saw them out. While Buster had never been great company, knowing she was truly alone was more than Tess could bear. Forcing down her bowl of cereal, she retreated to her bed to wallow in her pain.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Tales from the Heart. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you will be back to find out what happens next. Is Daniel going to go talk to Jack and Cora? What is going to happen to Jack and Tess's relationship? To make sure that you don't miss any episodes, hit the subscribe button to be notified when new episodes are posted. And don't forget that you can get the ebook of Deadly Valentine free through my website, jennaharte.com. Thank you again for listening. And until next time, this is Jenna Harte wishing you peace, love, and happily ever after.